Thanks so much, Keith. We are so glad to be here on The Next Right Thing. I'm Debbie Georgianni with Adam Blai. We are the co-hosts of The Spirit World, heard on Saturdays right here on Guadalupe Radio Network at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. And this Saturday, Adam, we are going to open the phone lines for everyone to comment on last week's episode when we talked all about movies and films and things that are hitting the theaters that are Christian faith-based. And also the opening of Cabrini is tomorrow. And we want our listeners to give them a chance to weigh in and tell us what they feel about the movie and if it was a very good, solid depiction of Mother Cabrini. But today we're talking about Lent. We're in the middle of Lent. And a lot of us, I'm not speaking for all of us, but a lot of us are feeling that blah feeling of being in the middle of Lent. And it's strange, Adam. People are a little bit agitated. People are a little bit frustrated, and there's strange, things happening. People are saying things to each other. I've noticed in the ministry work I do. So tell us about this, Adam. It's a journey. Lent is a journey. It's a process for us to get closer to God. Tell us what we should be experiencing right now and what we should be actually focusing on.
Okay, Deb. So let me make a confession. Just like a lot of us, this is a hard time for me. I sometimes, when I'm running from thing to thing, I get distracted and there's a temptation to lose focus on the extra things that we should be doing and the things we should be avoiding. And so for me, this is a really good time to get refocused and kind of reassert myself into Lent and let Lent reassert itself onto me. So really quick review as part of helping us do that. And by the way, the positive thing is, when it's hard like this and when you might be drifting in your ability to focus on Lent and stay locked in and do these things, this is really the fruitful time, and I'll explain why. Okay, so let's recall, number one, Lent is about becoming more like Jesus. That's the ultimate goal here. That takes primarily three forms: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Prayer is about deepening our life with God. Fasting is about overcoming our attachments, particularly to the sensual pleasures like the pleasure of eating. Almsgiving is about increasing our love for others. Caritas, charity. It's the center of the Christian life. So these are the three things we're working on: relationship with God, losing some of our attachments or overcoming some of them, and loving others more. That's to become more like Jesus. Okay. Now, but here we are, Deb. Lent gets hard. And that's partly why I think it's 40 days long. If you only had to keep this up for a week, you could probably do it. But when it's 40 days, you're going to get tired. You're going to get distracted. You're going to give yourself a pass. Something big is going to come along. Like, for instance, you and I were just traveling. We had a wonderful event with a lot of wonderful people. But while you're traveling, it's harder to remember to stay focused on these things. So something big comes along. And we let ourselves slip a little bit, or we forget something. Okay. Remember that choosing God, it's not about when it's convenient. If we only do things when they're convenient, we don't grow as much. And also in terms of the merit in that, Jesus says, to say that you love the person that loves you, your brother, your good friend, what merit is there in that? But to say that you love your enemy, to do something that's inconvenient or difficult is actually where the merit is. Okay, so here we are. It's getting difficult. And it's not convenient right now to do these things, but this is the time that we're going to make progress. This is the time where we're going to grow and we're going to have some conversion. We're going to choose God when it's not convenient to choose God, and we're going to fight through that. All right, we're going to apply some discipline. Because ultimately, the relationship with God, the extra things that we do for God, and the things that we give up for God should be through our whole life, not even just a season of Lent. I'm not saying to keep up these disciplines all year, but in general, the Christian life is an increasing focus on God through our lifetimes and a decreasing focus on the world. Okay. Another thing to think of is that love has a cost. Love requires us to give of ourselves. And if we give up something of ourselves, We've given away some of ourselves, just like Jesus gave up so much for us. So when it hurts a little bit, when it's a little bit of you feel it, maybe when you make that donation, when you do that charitable act, when you feel it and have that little twinge of, oh, I could have done something for myself, but I did this, and you feel that little bit of loss, that's when love is very concrete for us. Okay. And the final thing about this point is that Jesus didn't love us only when it was convenient for him. Jesus continued loving us through the garden and on to the passion, even when it was very inconvenient. Beyond that, of course, he sweated blood in contemplation of it. Okay, so this is a time that we can really engage. Now, a few beautiful things. Prayer. A lot of us say, well, what do you mean prayer? Say an extra Our Father? Do I say a rosary? What does prayer really mean? And of course, volumes have been written on this, but let's look at Catechism 2559, and if I can beg everybody's patience as I read it to you, because it's worth reading. Catechism's so beautiful. Prayer is the raising of one's mind and heart to God, or the requesting of good things from God. But when we pray, do we speak from the height of our pride and will, or out of the depths of a humble and contrite heart? He who humbles himself will be exalted. Humility is the foundation of prayer. Only when we humbly acknowledge that we do not know how to pray as we ought, are we ready to receive freely the gift of prayer. Man is a beggar before God. Wow. So it's okay to say, I don't know what you mean by pray deeply. Talk to God about that. Lord, I'm not sure how to pray deeply, but I want to have a deeper relationship with you in prayer. Help me grow that in myself. Okay? So, prayer is a raising of one's mind and heart to God. It doesn't have to be in a particular fixed form, though those are very helpful, especially in the beginning of the prayer life, and then they are helpful later too. Okay. Any thoughts on prayer, Deb?
Well, when you were reading Catechism 2559 about prayer, which I think is such a beautiful paragraph, at the end it says man is a beggar before God. Jerry Usher and I joke, but we really mean it when we say we're beggars for prayers, and it's true. It's this type of humbling oneself and really pouring your heart out to try and connect with God. It's so overwhelming at times because we battle all the time, or at least I do. We battle all the time of, what I want, and then what's in God's will for me, right? And so there's this constant struggle of, what I think I want and need, and then I'm sure what God knows that I want and need. And it's interesting, but when you do humble yourself to the point where you really are connecting in mind, body, and spirit, and just going 100%, with true humility and a complete, you absolutely reveal yourself completely. There's nothing, you're not holding anything back. It's quite amazing what you feel. Because a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't be praying to feel something. Prayer is a communication with God. You're talking to God. But you do feel a sense of connection when you invest yourself. It's very natural. What do you say to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what you're saying makes me think of Therese and the things that she wrote about prayer. Of course, Therese of Lisieux, a doctor of the church, Carmelite nun, very famous saint. But her prayer life was so wonderfully simple and direct. She actually, I think, preferred just a simple, direct, personal, ongoing conversation with God throughout the day as opposed to the fixed prayers. Of course, she did the fixed prayers, the divine office, the rosary. She did what she was supposed to do, but she seemed to prefer just a constant awareness of God and a constant attending to God in the little things that she did. The way she would prepare food, or the way that she would respond to somebody who spoke to her. The constant awareness of God within the simple things in life is also a form of prayer. And I think it's one that we can miss, and it's one of the great gifts I think that Therese gives to us. Because prayer has many different layers.
Well, you're talking about Saint Therese of Lisieux, and I agree with you. I mean, and it's interesting how you said, she had such a simple way. But if you look at the saints, and if you read the lives of the saints, I would say the majority of them had that simple, very strong communication with God. But it was very simple. In fact, it was so incredibly pure that it was like, is that it? When you read the lives of the saints, you're like, is that it? There's got to be more to this. And so that's kind of interesting that you're talking about that. And I think that helps us tremendously. Adam, we're going to need to hit the pause button in just a minute. So can you hold the rest of what you wanted to share for us to kind of get us, re-energized for this second round of Lent that we're going to be running this race to the finish line to Holy Thursday, to the Triduum. So we want to make this next couple laps around the track. Really, we want to do it well, and that's one of the reasons why we are doing the next right thing. It's for the encouragement for all of us, for our listeners, for everyone that has access to the Morning Joy program. We want them to be supercharged, ready to go, excited about finishing this 40-day event, which is our Lenten experiences, which is supposed to get us very close to God. I really just want our listeners to walk away from this segment going, okay, I'm not alone. We're all kind of feeling this like drag, and we're feeling this heaviness. We can do this. Let's pick up the pace and really focus, like you said, refocus and go to the finish line strong and pleasing to God.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't be discouraged, and don't be afraid to pick yourself up. And hey, even if you haven't started Lent until today, even if you just didn't engage at all, you can start today. Do not be afraid. God is always waiting there for you. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the big picture on Lent. We talked a little bit about prayer. Now let's talk a little bit about fasting. Fasting is way more than just not eating chocolate, of course, or something else that we give up, okay? So fasting really is about overcoming the exaggerated importance that we sometimes build up for the simple, small things in life, particularly the bodily things. Feeding the body's pleasures, eating fatty foods, drinking alcohol for some people, whatever it is that's just leading to the simple, very short-term pleasures of the flesh. And, eating is important. You need food, of course, but often we eat more than we need to. So we build up an exaggerated importance for things like food. And by fasting, by stopping some of the things that we normally do that are just usually the things that are for pleasure, we think of chocolate because that's something that's pleasurable for most people. When we're fasting, we're trying to kind of dismantle that idol that we have created in our lives, where we put some great importance on this thing. And we're doing that for a couple reasons. When we go through life just chasing our appetites and basically becoming a slave to our appetites, you can end up spending life just moving from pleasure to pleasure to pleasure without much reflection on life, without much presence in life, with losing focus, most importantly, of the real hunger in us, which is the hunger for God and the hunger to make it to heaven. That's what the soul yearns for, which is why we have this built-in need for spiritual experiences. That deep yearning for God can become kind of buried under layers of just chasing pleasures and chasing the appetites in life. And so fasting in different times of the year was a way to kind of remind ourselves that we shouldn't just become a slave to our appetites, but we need to get the body and those appetites under control and not let them dominate us. The other thing it does, Deb, in terms of dealing with sin, it gives us some practice with willpower. The simple fleshy things, like I'm a little bit hungry for a couple hours, but I just fight my way through it. I just decide I'm going to deal with it. Those exercises apply to other things in life. If we have the discipline to walk through an experience that's a little bit difficult, a little bit uncomfortable, we start getting a little bit stronger. We have the ability to bear a little more of trials in life, a little more difficulty, to push through and work a little bit harder, to pray a little bit longer, to stay and do the extra task for somebody else for their benefit when we've already done our work for the day. whatever it might be. Fasting is a powerful exercise. It not only helps us overcome the appetites, but it also trains us to be stronger regarding sin, because a big part of Lent is repenting. And it's one thing to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't do that sin anymore. But it's another thing to say, well, how am I going to overcome this? How am I going to actually stop in the future? It's one thing to say, I'm sorry I did it, but if I know I'm just going to do it again, and I don't make any plan to do better and overcome it, that's part of what is required for absolution and confession, is a firm amendment to not do the sin again. So, fasting is a powerful thing that is very useful on a number of levels. Any thoughts on fasting, Deb?
Yes, I have many thoughts, but we're going to run out of time, so I'll go quickly. You talked about when people, when we give into our appetites, or we give into something that numbs us, that numbs the pain. When people walk around and they want to forget about the pain by you walk around numbing yourself basically in the world. When we don't experience and get alone with ourselves and real with ourselves, and we don't experience that pain, the suffering now is working against us. And we talked about this earlier on a previous The Next Right Thing. The suffering should work for us. And what I mean by that, there's redemptive suffering, there's aligning our suffering with the passion of Jesus, there's getting very close to Jesus. But if we numb ourselves through food or alcohol or other abuses or things that distract us from God, just because we think we can deaden the pain that we're feeling, we miss that precious opportunity to have it work for us spiritually. Because basically we're just on autopilot, comatose, going through life, not even experiencing anything, thinking that that's bliss because we have no feeling. In life coaching, we talk about this all the time. But you have to be careful, because you don't, if somebody has suffered severe abuse and they have severe wounds, you have to be careful. You can't just, cold turkey everything, because then they could be raw and exposed and really be re-triggered or re-traumatized. However, for the rest of us who have, just the normal things of life, if you will, it is important for us to, in a mature way, face these things that are hurting us and let it work for us to deepen our spiritual life. What do you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we see in, working in psychology and therapy, is that ultimately to grow in wisdom and to ultimately find a way to benefit even from difficult things in life. And of course, God can bring good out of any circumstance. So before we run out of time, fasting naturally gives rise to charity. Why might that be? Well, if I'm hungry, I might realize, wow, it's uncomfortable to be hungry, and wow, that person there doesn't have the choice. They're feeling this a lot of the time because they don't have the means to eat as well as I do. It brings about some empathy for the people that aren't eating as well as we are. And this is, a very concrete, simple example related to food, but food is a big deal. So fasting, in a sense, gives rise to charity because it gives rise to some empathy for those that maybe don't have everything that we have. And charity is essentially love, and in that sense, it's the heart of the Christian spiritual life. So when we talk about almsgiving, we're talking about giving of ourselves for the good of the other. To will the good of the other is what almsgiving is about, okay? And so to will the good of the other is easier when I realize the other is having a hard time compared to me. Right. And they're my brother and my sister, and I want to help them.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, we have to make room for Alan Smith because everybody looks forward to when he comes on Morning Joy. He's talking about the 7 last words of Christ. But Adam, we'll be back tomorrow, God willing, talking about, we can talk more about this, but also it's the opening of Cabrini. So we'll be talking about, what it means to be a strong woman on International Women's Day. So that's interesting. But for now, we're going to send it over to Keith so we can get ready for Alan Smith. Thanks, Keith.